Hey guys, welcome back to another edition of Weekly F1 Wrap Up with Jess on what would have been the Chinese Grand Prix weekend coming up. But nevertheless, we don't have a Grand Prix. We're still 2 weeks away from a Grand Prix, but there's still news. So let's get into it. Ferrari have failed again, despite there not being a race. And how is this possible, you ask? Well, let's talk about it, shall we? We may be 2 weeks away from it, but we're still talking about the Australian Grand Prix. In my previous episode, I talked about Ferrari lodging an appeal. Well, we finally have the results of that. To do this and have the appeal overturned successfully, or to even have the appeal heard, Ferrari as a team needed to present new, significant, and relevant evidence as to why the penalty should not be upheld. The team cited precedent, which has previously been done, and elected to present telemetry data from Carlos Sainz's car and witness statements from Sainz himself and other drivers in the form of post-race interviews. But the team failed to meet the most basic evidentiary threshold required by the stewards. The evidence they presented was not new, it was not significant, and for the most part, it was largely irrelevant. The telemetry data that they provided was of no use in determining fault for the collision. The argument put forth that the car failed to brake properly due to the cold tyres fell on deaf ears, with the stewards indicating that all drivers on the grid were subject to the same conditions, and that they all needed to take that into account and adapt to the conditions as necessary, which is a fair call, in my opinion. Now let's go to Sainz's witness statement, which the stewards again determined provided no use in determining fault for the collision, with the stewards stating that if they believed that Sainz had something to present or something that might be beneficial in handing out this penalty, they would have summoned him. They would have spoken to him if they thought it would have provided something. And it didn't. The stewards also found that the post-race interviews were of little use in deciding anything about the collision, and determined that they were not considered significant or relevant to their considerations. So overall, this entire exercise was a failure and a waste of everybody's time. And while I commend them as a team for their efforts in trying to get the decision overturned and the points reinstated, their use of precedent was not ideally implemented. Their choice of evidence was poor, given that the stewards had access to all of it previously. In my opinion, they should have taken a leaf out of Aston Martin's book from Saudi Arabia and brought up similar instances where a collision has occurred and no penalty was given. Or if a penalty had been given, it was overturned, and then related it back to this particular incident. This would have likely met the evidentiary threshold, as it would have been new, it would have been significant, and it would have been relevant. But for some reason, they chose not to take that path, which is confusing because after all, F1 is not short on crashes and spins and everything in between. They could have had their pick of so many instances and bluffed their way through it. But for some reason, they chose, yet again, the wrong strategy. And I mean, Ferrari, if you're listening to this, which I doubt you are, but in the event you are, and you need some legal counsel, I just graduated law school. Feel free to hit me up. Now, on to something a little less depressing than the failure of Ferrari. the logistical challenges of the race calendar. Now, we know that environmental sustainability and competitive sustainability have been discussed a lot recently. The constant toing and froing from Europe to the Middle East to Asia, Australia, the US, and back again has made many people question what F1 have actually hoped to achieve with this year's calendar, which is allegedly more economical and sustainable and was designed with the environment in mind. But it's not really, is it? So, next up on the race calendar, following the axing of the Chinese Grand Prix this weekend, due to COVID-19, we head back to Baku for round 4 of the championship, which is coupled with a short turnaround for the Miami Grand Prix in round 5 the week after. 2 weeks after this, we're treated to a triple header back in Europe, going from Imola to Monaco and then to Barcelona. Logistically, this is dreadful for both the environment as well as the teams, their staff, and the drivers. So, how do we fix it? Well, Grand Prix Drivers Association director and Mercedes driver George Russell believes coupling the current standalone races, such as Australia and China, with Middle Eastern races, or grouping them together, will reduce both the mileage teams need to travel and also the jet lag the drivers and thousands of team employees must overcome on race weekends. And now this is a particularly pressing issue, especially if the F1 governing body are looking to implement additional races in Asia and expand from the 24 races currently already on the calendar. Now, George has come up with a couple of suggestions in that moving the first free practice session to a Friday afternoon, allowing teams to arrive on a Thursday morning rather than on a Wednesday, allowing everybody to spend less time away from home and their families and easing some of the pain caused by the race calendar. Now, this resolves the sustainability of the sport and the welfare of staff and drivers and everything, but not really the environment, which is of great concern. Ultimately, there needs to be less toing and froing from Europe to America, Europe to the Middle East, Europe to Australia, Europe to China, and around again. They need to go back to the idea that they said that they were doing with this calendar by grouping in regions. It's clearly not happening. You've got 4 American races that are spread out over 8 months. That is not grouping them together. You could do Miami and Canada together. And then, you've got Austin, Mexico, and Brazil. And then we're back again in November for Las Vegas. That's not grouping them together for FIA. Just, logically speaking, you haven't grouped them together. But George's proposal would mean of moving FP1 to a Friday afternoon would mean the removal of a free practice session altogether, which some people will be happy about and some people will not be. But with the Formula One looking to implement more sprint races across the calendar, this may be a little bit trickier to balance. But I guess we'll see. Now, let's take a look into the future for a little minute. Audi. They have come out this week and indicated that while they don't enter the competition for another 3 years, their design of their future power unit is well and truly underway, with the team having manufactured a prototype that is allegedly ready to be tested by the end of the year, with the final design of that power unit and the overall car set to be finalised at some point in 2025, ahead of their 2026 debut. The prototype of their drivetrain is reported to encompass a combustion engine, electric motor, control electronics, energy recovery system and battery, as well as an electric motor. And while this design and manufacture at this point may seem to be counterintuitive, given that the regulation changes for 2026 onwards are yet to be finalised, it appears Audi and Sauber are taking a note of Mercedes' success upon the implementation of the turbo hybrid era in 2014 and have begun creating the skeleton and the foundation for their future drivetrain that can be adapted to future regulations when they are eventually finalised. It has been reported that the team has a single cylinder test engine currently in operation at their new headquarters in Germany that they are relying heavily on for insight into their new power unit, which is set to feature increased capability for the energy recovery unit, with the overall goal to improve the efficiency of the car, which isn't that really the overall goal for every team? And now, this one, my final segment for this episode, might be a little bit out there, but stay with me. Could Sebastian Vettel be returning to Formula One? According to Ted Kravitz, quite possibly. It has been reported that the four-time world champion may be set to return before the end of the season, citing a return to Red Bull, where he spent his most successful years of his career. But he won't be returning as a driver, which is probably a good thing, considering Red Bull have enough reserve drivers to fit out another 2 teams at this point. Ted believes that Vettel is gearing up to take over from Helmut Marko in an advisory position for the team and overseeing the driver development program, which is credited with bringing multiple drivers to the Formula One track, including Vettel himself. Ted also floated the idea, however, unlikely that Seb may take up an advisory role with Audi and Sauber prior to their entrance in 2026. I still don't think that's going to happen. He'll probably, if he is going to come back, go to Red Bull. But I guess for now, only time will tell, and we will have to wait and see where this goes. Thanks, guys. That's it for today. This has been your weekly F1 wrap up with Jess. If you're not already, please give me a follow on TikTok or Instagram. It's been a pleasure having you. If you'd like to send me any questions or have anything that you want to know more about, please feel free to shoot me a DM or anything. Until next time, thanks, guys.